Thank you very much, Brian. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kelsey Badger. I am the Research Data Librarian here at University Libraries at Ohio State. This event that we have invited you to today is part of our celebration of International Love Data Week. So we have a whole host of events happening this week on all things data, some in person, some online. There are also many events happening underneath the International Love Data Week banner across the world, many of which are online and open to the public. So I'm going to drop into chat here links both to the Love Data Week events at Ohio State, as well as the international event listing, if you want to check out other opportunities for ways to find, use, and work with data. And now I am happy to turn it over to our speaker for today. We are welcoming Ansel Oakleaf who is a senior data analyst with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion here at Ohio State. Ansel, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I am happy to be here today to share information about diversity, equity, and inclusion data. And as Brian mentioned, if you have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll try to monitor, but sometimes I get a little distracted with the presentation and miss those cues. So feel free to call me out as well. So a little more about myself. I am from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. My unit itself is Strategic Diversity Planning, Training, and Assessment. And we are a hodgepodge of a team. There's 3 of us. There's my director, Dr. Sarah Childers. There's myself as the data analyst. And then we have Miss Sophia Untun, who is our educational specialist. So we all work together to sort of facilitate information across the university, sometimes the Med Center, sometimes externally, sharing information that is relevant to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We do provide programmatic information from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, such as Young Scholars, the Moral Scholars Program. However, we also support the university itself. So any data request that's needed to look at diversity, equity, inclusion will come our way, and we will assist as much as we can. I am happy to share this PowerPoint in an alternative format if need be. Just go ahead and email me at oakleaf.4@osu.edu, and I can get that prepared and share that with you if you need that made available. I was fortunate enough to receive the list of questions that many of you had provided when you registered for this event, which really offered me a lot of insight into who's participating today. We have quite an array of folks, from staff to faculty to other members across the university, Med Center, outside university, and lots of wonderful questions. So we have such a large topic to cover. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully I can answer a lot of those questions that were presented to me within this presentation. If not, feel free to drop those in the chat. So let's get started. The first thing that I would like to do is just put out there an acknowledgement statement about statistics. So statistical science has traditionally been rooted and intertwined with eugenics, which is very ironic with the work that I do in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the opposite of the eugenics. So I do want to point out that that's where a lot of the history, a lot of the statistical science has originated from. My focus is to take statistics and to sort of unwind how it was interwoven with the eugenics movement, which is fairly recent. As of 2018, it was still being used in that fashion. I'm sure it still is. My goal is to use statistics to lead the pathway to inclusilytics for the reason to acknowledge the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging, and justice in all spaces for all people. Let's go ahead and begin with a couple key definitions so that we have a level playing field. First thing is diversity. We've all heard the DEI. We're familiar with diversity in the general sense of differences between cultures. It could be race, ethnicity, it could be age, sex, gender, um, regional differences. And I'd like to open that up to be looking at the presence of differences within a shared space. To me, that's the most important part, is the shared space. And then the idea is that these shared spaces and the work that we do spurs in innovation, advancement, and enhancement. By having diversity, it takes those areas and it just sort of shapes that shared space for a level of comfort, for allowing the potential of equity, which is by providing or removing barriers so that everyone can reach their potential for success, growth through access, resources, and opportunity, especially for those who have systematically had barriers that were created specifically for failure. So we would like to see those removed and provide that extension of ensuring that everybody is included within this shared space. And inclusion is looking at the authentic welcoming of all people, regardless of what their differences are, and allowing individuals to be authentic within this shared space. Oftentimes, we work towards diversity and equity, but we forget the inclusion piece. And that is pivotal, as you're going to find out, looking at metrics, KPIs, that you need the inclusion piece to really keep folks and to have that level space of where everybody feels welcome and they can be themselves, not have to blend in, not have to hide their identity. We want everybody to be respected, celebrated, and valued. Therefore, they can then feel safe and achieve success through themselves, through their work, and that in turn leads to success for who we are as a group. All right, so a big part of what I get asked is, are there DEI data toolkits? What does that look like? How is that shaped within each of the institutions? So I'm going to be pretty broad when I talk about these institutions, because we do have folks from the university, we have folks who are from the Med Center outside of both the university and the Med Center here today. And so I want to be inclusive. So I'm just going to refer to institutions as any of your company, the university or the Med Center, wherever you're from, is going to be that general idea of an institution. So many of you have probably gone to Google University and started researching the DEI data toolkit. And you may find a few brief articles here or there. A lot of them you might have to pay a subscription to read the article, or you might find a white paper, but there's really not much out there yet on a DEI data toolkit. And one of the reasons for that is that each institution is very unique. There is not one toolkit that's going to work and be able to look at DEI across all institutions across the globe. It really has to be tailored to fit your institution, even down towards your department, to your units. So we're going to talk about what that looks like and how you can shape the DEI toolkit within your world so that you can work with your data and bring DEI into your workforce, to your students, to your research. So the first part that I like to talk about is language. Language is very pivotal in many aspects of cultures. The spoken word is very important. It has power within many cultures. Once you voice something and put it out there, it is embodied by those around us. So we have to be cognizant of the language that we use ourselves, through our team, through our institution. So as you look at your institutional language, what is it telling you? Are you current in your language? For example, how do you classify your employees, your students who are international, who come from another region? Are you still calling them an alien? How's that look within your realm? So try and look at how you categorize different cultures, different groups. what's current? Are you using language that was established by one culture and bestowed onto another? For example, are you still using colonial language to describe other cultural identities? A big one that I see, especially here in the Midwest, is using language such as the Indians or Navajo to describe the Native American tribe that resides in the four corners of the United States. And they themselves have always called themselves the Dene. However, we have chosen to refer to them as Indians or the Navajo. So just sort of looking from the perspective of the culture, are you using their language, their words, terminology to speak about themselves? Another important facet as I have worked with DEI language is that a lot of it is negative. Is there a way for us to take that language and turn it into a positive world? So let's unpack the idea of underrepresented minorities, the URMs. So here we have two negative connotations. The first, under, which means beneath, which, you think beneath, sort of that ladder at the bottom part, the bottom rung. So someone who is beginning or less than. So it tends to be more negative. Minority also meaning less than. So if we have these two negatives, it in essence, some of these groups are underrepresented. They are a minor group, but we tend to think of them negatively. So a way for us to find a positive word that would have similar meanings, connotations, but makes it, a lot more friendly. So one word that I like to use instead of URM or underrepresented minority is untapped. We have untapped populations. Why aren't we using these untapped populations to help us become more successful? We could be hiring these untapped populations that can come into academia that is traditionally a white male field. Let's look at, untapped populations within a corporate role. Say that you have your company predominantly works in the Appalachian region. However, your entire business population are all coming from a metropolis city. Do they have that understanding of what it's like to be in the rural Appalachian area? So why don't we pick up some untapped folks who are from the Appalachia area and hire them to bring that perspective to the company, to share ideas, thoughts, and experiences, which will then in turn help growth and services outwards towards the population that we're interested in. Also a good one that I've seen, it's so common. When you have metrics and KPIs, we tend to talk about our target populations. I want you to take a moment. What does target and targeted mean to you? And how can you see that as being a negative connotation? I know for me, I grew up in the world where we talked about target populations. We talked about the master list. And what is that? In the early days, it was just words. It didn't mean anything to me. And as I matured as a professional and grew, I began to understand the idea of these target populations that, the connotation of using guns and arrows and shooting at a population. Wait a minute, what this is now bringing more imagery to mind. And so every time I hear the words of target populations, it makes me think of shootings. That's not a good vision that I want to have when I talk about these special populations that I'm interested in understanding, helping, and working with. The same for a master list. In data, I often hear of master databases. That just brings back the whole concept of slavery to me. So, why don't we replace master with original? It's an easy swap of the road, it's word and it's positive and it moves us forward. So that's a big point of starting your toolkit is to look at the language of the culture of your unit, your department, your institution, and see what you're using and try and, you know, holistically look at it and bring it up to what's current and how folks identify within each of these various spaces. So that brings me into the importance of data dictionaries. Anybody who's ever worked with me, anytime I start a new position, the first thing I want to do is create a data dictionary. I love having a data dictionary because it allows me to sit down and have a real conversation with somebody who has a data request or a question about a dashboard or a report that I've created. And I take these definitions and I share it when I've created a report or a data visualization. And then the audience is familiar with how I'm using the terminology. They can see if it's the same way that they have defined the variables. And it gives us a starting point to have a real conversation and the real meaning behind the data. So this goes hand in hand with understanding your language. So as you're going through identifying your language, you can start working on your data dictionary. What I do is I create an Excel spreadsheet. I put down the variable, the definition, and if I have a data source, I will list that down. I am one that, I am not inventing these definitions. A lot of these are already put out there by groups that identify, and this is their terminology, this is their definition. I'm going to borrow that and give them credit for their own definitions. So I document all of that. Also, I like to go through if I have to do any mandatory reporting. So if it's going towards federal, state reporting, accreditation, or if I've done research, I have a definition handy. I can just pull it right out and everything is identified and the source is already available. Makes it nice and easy for any of my research and data visualizations. And I'm going to try not to read my slides too much, so y'all can feel free to read through those as I talk. And also, I am quite a talker, so hopefully we can get through all our slides in a timely fashion and leave enough time for question and answers at the end. So I think at this point, I'm going to check the chat and see if we have any questions
I
here.
can give you
Yes.
an update on what's happened in the chat. We
Awesome.
had a question about how can we learn what is the proper verbiage for different cultures?
Mhm. That is an excellent question. So what I do is I've created a network. So I've gone through and I've identified peer institutions and identified who their DEI specialists are and created conversations with them. Within each of the institutions, there are sub units or units that are designated for working with various with these special populations. So if I'm looking at race and ethnicity, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to each of these individual groups and say, hey, this is outside of my worldview. I want to learn and sort of do an interview with the group and learn more about how they identify, what terminology they're using. For example, we have looked at Latino and Latina for a long time, the gendered terminology for male, female. And then over time, it became Latinx. And just in the past year, we're now looking at Latin E for replacing Latinx. And this is coming from the Latin E community. And it is a Spanish word that is gender neutral for male, female. So we are slowly embracing that at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We're integrating that into our language, socializing it across the university. So as we make that change to the communications, folks will have already heard it and then they're prepared for this change. So when we create a report or a dashboard and they see Latin E, they're going to understand that that's gender neutral terminology. but that came from specifically our Latin population, where we learned that from. So it's just going out talking to peers. There's many great websites, so you can go out, and Google is my best friend, and I have bookmarked many groups. There are specialized groups that work with segments of populations. So you'll find, the Asian Pacific Islanders. They have some official websites designated to their culture, and you can get on there. And all of them tend to list their variables and definitions. And you can tell, they'll put dates on it, and you'll see how current their terminology is. And most of them are, they're happy to talk to you if you send them an email. And you can talk to each of these groups, specialized groups, and just broach a conversation with them. It could be as simple as talking to coworkers or employees at your group, or students. You can have focus groups to learn more about your students, about your employees, and get that information. Excellent question. Any other questions?
It looks like, Ansel, we had a follow-up to the question about learning proper verbiage for different cultures, asking whether the university, so specifically within Ohio State, if we have a resource so that each unit doesn't have to go through that exercise.
Wonderful question. So right now I am working with a group of folks, and we are looking at DEI variables and definitions. We're looking at through the lens of our students and employees right now. And I'm working with the data governance team. And what we're doing within our smaller working group is taking various terminology. We are collecting definitions. The first round that we're working on right now, it goes through the process of where we identify a handful of variables that we want to define. We come up with the most current definition that we can find. We're putting in, we have official reporting for various channels of federal reports, state reports, and our accreditation. We're identifying those definitions as well through our working group. And then we're going to work with our data governance team, and they put together another working group that reviews. So those who are the data owners, so I don't own any of this data, I just know bits about, how to define it. So they're going to go talk to the data owners, review the definitions with them, and then they're going to put a call out to the university and ask for reviewers. And then the reviewers are going to look at the definitions and give input. Do they have other definitions that are imperative? Did they interpret differently? They're going to provide feedback to the data governance team. The bigger teams are going to come together. We're going to look at all this feedback and use it to help shape and craft the global definition. And then these definitions, the university, we used to have a data cookbook, a data dictionary, but it is expired, and they're in the process of replacing it. And once that's replaced, these definitions are going to exist within our university dictionary. We're going to be able to put in which reports link back to the definitions when we use it, best practices, nuances that come with the definitions, and then it will go through a review process and make sure that we keep those definitions current. So this is a new process that we've started. We've only had a couple definitions go through the process that's looking at currently the student side of the house of the university. And the first one, of course, was how do we define a student? So that one has already passed, gone through. So now we're jumping in because we want to be able to share this outside of our unit and have it made available to others so you don't have to craft your own definitions. So if anybody's interested in assisting, feel free to send me an email. I do not like to work in a silo. I have ideas and I know how to really Google very well, as I like to say. But I'm always looking for expert opinions as well, or those who are interested and willing to do some work. So yes, we are working on that as an institution right now. Any other questions before I move on?
Looks like most of the rest of what's in the chat is just engagement,
Okay.
comments on some of what you had said, as well as there was a little bit of discussion around alternatives for target population. Someone had asked for a reminder of what you'd suggested, and we got some great responses from the audience about
Wonderful.
using untapped population, valued population, and focal population.
Love it. That's great. I'm going to be excited to see the chat after I'm done. This is great. All right. So let's go ahead and move on. So the next part, I wish there was a wonderful roadmap that I could give everybody and say, this is how we want to, complete our DEI work. Here are the metrics you want to use. These are the KPIs you want to use. But because every group, every institution is so unique, is that it really comes down to having a group that works together to work on, the individual toolkit that you're going to be using within your institution, whatever that may be, a company, a department, a unit, or globally Ohio State or the medical center, however we want to look at that. So one of the things that I'd like to point out after the language data dictionary gets going is, what's the purpose of your work? Why do you want to do DEI work? Have you really sat down and sort of brainstormed the reasoning? Right now is just one of the hottest topics that's going on. I attended an NCAS white paper forum that looked at a survey that was sent out to university administrators and tech leaders. And they said within the 5 years, in the top 5 biggest advancements that they want to see at their university is DEI analytics. So when I heard that, I'm like, we got to look at where we're at for Ohio State. Where are we going? What is our plan? If you're following the OAA academic plan, there's a lot of DEI initiatives that are going to be coming down to us. So I feel like we are active and part of that movement. So that leads me to want to say, so what's the purpose of our work? Why are we doing this? Are we looking to bring innovation and to broaden the scope of our institution? Are we looking to grow by having the greatest minds coming together, working to solve, a basic problem to a very complex problem? Or is it that we suspect that our company is solely missing their audience? So going back to my example that I used earlier about, a metropolitan company trying to service an Appalachian community, are they able to speak the same language? Do they understand the nuances? Say it's, let me give you an example. I moved here from Arizona, and trying to get cell coverage in Arizona, especially if you go to any of the Native American reservations, hit and miss. You're looking at vast areas without power. I used to teach, and I would have students. I remember one student, it was an online course that I taught that he signed up for. He lived 200 miles away from Flagstaff, where I was teaching, and he lived out about a good 60 miles from his chapter house. The chapter house is like a community center, and at the chapter house, they had a generator. He had to ride his horse. He would ride his horse those 60 miles, get to the chapter house, take his laptop, start the generator, and jump onto his horse. So that's a whole new experience. So now how are we to engage as a university to our students who are going through that process? Are we missing something important here? Yeah, we're missing the idea that a lot of our population that my institution was serving, they don't have electricity at their homes, and they're riding horses to get to a generator to log into a course. How can we go about and changing that experience for the student. Could we create something that's like a recorded podcast and then they can play it and they can listen to it, battery powered on their radio or some sort of handheld device, and they didn't have to go that far just to plug into a course and take an online course. So it's sort of looking at who that audience is and getting those resources out to them. Another thought of purpose is working with research. So that's a big component that I've been hearing a lot about lately. And we'll talk more about the pulsometers. The idea that when they were creating pulse oximeters, the research was done on Caucasian individuals. And it just surprised me how they used, the lights to go between the figures to figure out what that oxygen level is. But when the folks who created these pulse oximeters were like, well, this isn't standard. This is not to be used as standard practice. We've only verified it on Caucasian people. Anybody who has darker skin, it tends not to work on. But that was not shared out to the medical profession from what I've been reading. And a lot of doctors in a recent article that I read talked about that was the first time they'd heard about it. They've been practicing, using the pulsometer for 20 years now. And they're just hearing about now that this isn't as accurate. And then it makes you think back to, coming through COVID. We relied on that so much. How many people did we miss because the technology had not been tested, the information had not been shared? What about that global design? So that's something to keep in mind is the purpose of our work. Why are we doing this? So as I love to say is why, ask why. Let's dig into this a little more. So I'm going to spend a few more slides about the purpose and the whys of what we're doing. Some institutions, they just want that checkbox. They want to say, hey, we're counting our diversity. Boom, we're good. They look at it once a year, never look at it again. There are some where they want positive and additional information. But again, it's on that idea of we're going to look at this once a year. Did our metrics shift? Are we hiring more diverse candidates this year than we did last year? We did. Yay. Good job. We'll see next year if that keeps rising. And we've got this number that we're trying to get to, and have we met it? But they're only going to look at it once a year. Then there's curiosity. Nothing wrong with being curious. However, are you just wanting to know what exists in your institution and you really have no intention of following through with what you discover? So why do you want to know? Well, there are some good reasons. So these are the starting points. This just sort of gives us, that baseline of like, okay, we need to begin somewhere, but we're not too certain where we're beginning. And it gets to the point of where we sort of fumble around as a combined community trying to understand and integrate DEI into it. And eventually we come to the conclusion of, wait, we want knowledge. We want to be able to make sustainable and positive advancements within our shared space. This shared space represents so much. It could be in the field of medicine, education, or resources out to the community. This is corporation, this is private, this is public. We all can make sustainable and positive advancements by knowing what our DEI data looks like and what it's telling us. So now we're moving towards knowledge. And through knowledge, we're going to be able to start looking at what can we change? Can we grow from this? And that knowledge hopefully will bring positive change and help us to grow and help support the individuals within our institution. If our individuals are succeeding, our institution is going to succeed inherently from that. So if we're supporting all of our community, we're just going to grow beyond belief. We're going to have the best minds. We're going to have a healthy work environment, and everybody is going to grow together and learn and share and bring about innovation. So change and growth begets innovation, which allows for new and unique ideas that come together from the diversity, sharing their ideas, talking, merging thoughts together. And this only comes through the authenticity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we start at that low end of not really understanding where we're at, what we need to do, coming to this end of this is what we want. We want knowledge, we want change, we want growth, we want innovation. And all of that comes in from understanding our community, showing true respect and promotion of authenticity of each of our people. Okay, and I'm sort of keeping an eye on the time here. So next steps always brings the who, what, and when. So with the who, usually comes our leadership. Whoever we report up to, we need to know that they're invested in DEI work and that they support the work, and we find a champion who is going to stand with us to move forward with our DEI work. So what that means is that you need to have a diverse team that is going to also work with that champion leader and become champions themselves. So as I go through and do a lot of my work, I can't do it solely. I can't go through and create all my data definitions in my silo and go out to the university and say, look what I have. It takes more. It takes that community. It takes everybody. I have my specialties, my identity, and we want all those intersectionalities to come together and create a very robust look of what DEI is as a whole. Need to identify who benefits from the work. What information do we need to know to create those benefits? Which then leads us to, okay, well, we've created this idea of who the audience is, who's working on it, what the benefits are. So exactly what are we going to measure? What are those positive outcomes are going to look like? What is the action that we need to take to make those positive outcomes occur? Is that even sustainable? If it's sustainable, let's start really rolling and moving. And then you create this wonderful cycle that's going to go through. You're going to see the change. You're going to have success. You're going to evaluate that success. And then you're going to look at what your next steps are. So that begins to when. When does this process begin? It can begin at any time with anybody. And it just means bringing people together at the table to start the discussion. You need to go through and identify, are you using metrics? Are you going to use KPIs? What questions for your research do you need? Do you already own the data? Do you need to collect the data? Do you need to analyze the data? When will you share that data? What's that timeline look like? If you create a cycle for evaluation, success, and next steps, does that continue or does the cycle end at some point? So let's dive into this a little deeper here. So metrics are really low-level data points. These are relevant to units and departments. So this is what makes your unit, your department very specific, very unique. It is operational and it tends to track quantitative measurements specifically, your business processes, and KPIs is looking more at that global, high-level institution goals and objectives. These are going to be looking at your strategic decisions, your missions, your core values. You're going to want to measure towards these goals. And that can filter through your metrics that are common between your units, between your departments. And that's what creates the key KPIs. Those are used to make your strategic decisions. So sort of out there on its own, but very relevant, is the research questions. What is the purpose of your research? What questions have you identified that requires DEI action to your work? Are you looking at a new form of, say, a new tablet for some, you want to cure some sort of disease? So as you get your research population ready to start testing your medicine, who are you going to bring in to test? Is this medication specifically for one group of people? Are you intending to only provide this medication to Caucasian people, which typically most research studies, Caucasian males are the ones that are researched. What about females? Does this medication work on women? Does this medication work on people of different ethnic, cultural differences, regional differences? So you have to look at that global movement, know who your population is that you want to service. And that brings about, as we mentioned earlier, that greater knowledge and that innovation for a better future that we all are looking forward to. So through research, it can either be theoretical or practical. You got your theories, you want to bring it out and start discussing, and then eventually that will lead into some of that practical application. And all of that will be implemented in the real world to make a difference. That's the whole point of research, is to go in and to make a positive difference in the lives of people. And I'm starting to pick up pace here because I'm noticing our time is starting to sort of slide away. So some questions to keep in mind as you're creating your data toolbox is number one, should I use DEI data? That's the first question that I ask folks. I have a lot of people who come to me and ask for data or data visualization, and they want all these DEI filters built into the dashboard. And I like to say, are you ready for this information? Are you prepared to act on the knowledge that you're going to gain by adding these DEI variables into your analytics, to your visualization, through your research, through your surveys? And if the answer is no, then you're going to want to wait till you are prepared to act on it. Select the variables that you have the ability to make a difference, to act on, and to move forward. And also, it's easier to do a handful instead of all DEI variables because there's a lot out there. Which then comes to the question, so many DEI variables, which ones should you use? And that gets down to, what are your questions? What are you trying to accomplish? What are your metrics, your KPIs? Start with a handful each year and then grow your metrics, your KPIs each year. And that way you phase in and you can phase out as need be. Sometimes your metrics will become a KPI. Eventually your KPIs will go down to being a metric. You always have to be prepared to make changes on the spot, to pivot and to look at something new that's happening. You may be in a department that merges with another, and then your population changes and you need to look at something totally different. Or your company merges with the company, or they divide and become unique companies. So you have to be ready to make those changes. Also, a question to ask is, what insights do you want to gain? Are you just looking at, a pulse on what the diversity looks like at your company? So you're monitoring it, creating some baseline data so that you can start looking at KPIs and metrics and then start taking action. And then if you're doing a research project, what is crucial to your research? There may be some components that are totally irrelevant. You may be trying to create a prosthetic, say for children 6 to 12 years old, and that is your specific range. So you're not going to want to bring in information on children less than 6 or anybody over the age of 12. You're going to want to make sure you stay within your realm of 6 to 12-year-olds. So you have to be able to figure out what metrics are going, or what variables fit with your questions, your insights, and what your overall goal and intent is. All right, so let's talk about the data. So there's quantitative, qualitative data. Most of you are probably familiar with this, but just a quick review. Quantitative are the numbers, and you collect those either at intake for a patient, a student, or an employee, typically about demographic data. You want to know names, you want to know age, race, ethnicity, sex, or gender, weight, height, blood pressure, all of those numbers. Those are your quantitative. Then you have your qualitative. This can be those open-ended textual questions that can be gathered through surveys or interviews, and it's text. And A lot of people are afraid, just as afraid of the text analyses as they are the quantitative analyses. But with a little time, and it can be a lot of fun to work with both. There's pros and cons for working with each data piece here. Quantitative, most people find it to be the easiest to work with. It's quick, it provides insights rather rapidly. Qualitative data, I find, is really good to either begin your story, to understand your quantitative data, or to help understand and explain what you see in the quantitative. So say you're working with quantitative data and the numbers just are not making sense. So then you go out and you do some interviews with folks and you gain more understanding, and then you can explain the quantitative piece better. So qualitative can be at the beginning, the middle, the end, or through the whole process. And to be honest, both are essential to telling an entire story. Both of those are just so crucial to understanding and storytelling. Okay, some important notions I always like to keep out there is just to remember that the variables that we work with, they're real people. So we may think of, we're collecting sex, we're collecting gender, we're collecting race and ethnicity. We've got 57 out of 112 here, and we start focusing on, here's the categories and here's the raw number. But we also have to keep in mind that these represent real people and they have real lives that are impacted by the work that we do. Privacy. Privacy is so important. You have to make sure your data is kept safe, secure, and not to release any identifiable data outwards. Make sure that when you're reporting outwards, that if you have small numbers, you suppress those so that nobody can be identified. A new form that's coming through is data ethics. As you work within your unit, your department, your institution, does the institution have any policy on data ethics? Do they provide any trainings? If not, is a very worthwhile investment for professional development or advocating for your institution to create, guidance on ethics of using data, reporting on data, and what does that look like as a shared value for your institution and for the lives that you all touch with the work that you're going to be doing. Okay, so now to the piece of storytelling. This is really the fun part, but also probably one of the hardest parts of working with any type of data, but especially DEI data. So I want to ask you, how will you tell your story? How do you feel comfortable sharing your story? Take a few seconds and think about that. How do you present your data when you work with it? Do you pick a number or not pick a number? Do you come across a number that you've analyzed and you found 57% of this population does X? And you just share out that 57% and that's it? Or are you having to write a report? Is this going to be a full-blown report that shows your entire research project? Is it going to be a journal article? Or are you creating some of these awesome tables that are great for quick comparisons last year to this year? Are you preparing reports to keep your accreditation or oversight boards? Who is the audience and who are you sharing this with? So there's the report, then there's the dashboards. Dashboards, leaders love dashboards. They want to know that 57%, but they might want a little more. They want a pretty picture to go with it. Dashboards are great for non-specialists communicating information outwards to a wider audience who doesn't have a statistical, scientific, mathematical type background to read the reports. You have internal, external consumers who will go to these dashboards, which may be, updated quarterly, yearly, daily. They may have the ability to draw down the data or it's set and there's no flexibility. One of my new favorites is video presentations, which takes the idea of your dashboard and it combines it with, more of it's not even qualitative. It is talking to the live person who represents a cohort of the research, of the statistic. And it's bringing in that idea of remembering that these are people, and it shares their story. For example, if we are looking at sharing out information on one of our young scholars program for a cohort, they start out in high school. Let's find someone who is part of the young scholars program. They started out in high school, came to Ohio State, graduated, and now an alumni. Take that cohort data, show the process of how successful our students were, but also bring in that live voice from someone who is actually part of that cohort, sharing their story, which leads to broadening the gap of making it personable and actual storytelling. So that is really a powerful piece that is so that I'm just seeing becoming widespread right now. Okay, so I want to be real quick on reports here because we're really closing in here. So really, reports are those who are for our colleagues, experts. It goes through the whole research process, and some of the tools that you're going to use are going to be the Microsoft Suite, statistical software. It's going to be, very technical jargon and geared for academia and professionals. So that's where you're going to want to leave your reports. Again, I'm going to skip this slide because this sort of comes back to what we talked about earlier. Dashboards, again, are for anybody. It goes through the whole process of data collection, analysis, interpretation of analyses that's in the background. But then we show them the visualization of the data with the graphs, the projections. You can use raw data, refined data, quantitative, qualitative data. Some of the more popular tools is Tableau, which is a pay-use tool. So free tools, Power BI is a pay tool as well if it's not part of your Microsoft suite. R and Python, Excel typically tend to be free of use and very easy to use and to get trainings on. So the story, this is important. When I was a young person, I worked for the Park Service at a historic monument. It was an old fort out in the desert. And one of the components from the 1800s was quilting. So I took the opportunity to learn from my elders who would hand quilt as part of their demonstrations. And I was just so impressed by one lady who had the most beautiful artmanship of any work that I've ever seen for quilting. You would look at the front, you could see the stitching. It was just beautiful. And you would flip it over, and her stitches were organized, and it was beautiful. And when I got into data analytics, I have often thought about our work as being identical to quilting. The front part, the part that everybody sees, the top, shows on your bed, that's the story that we're sharing. And that's how we present our data. What are we trying to share from beginning to end? What's that story via images? And then if we were to take our data quilt and flip it over, we're going to see the beautiful work that we created and document the process of how we started, what our research project was, the tools that we used, how our methodology, bringing all of that together nice and neatly. So the story should always begin and have a beginning point at point zero. You need foundational data. So many people are afraid to start collecting data because they fear that they might be put out of their job or lose their program. And that's the idea. The idea to start collecting data is to be at point zero, know where you're at, and use that to devise a plan to start moving your marker and to start growing. That's the middle. That's where your goals, where your metric is, and then end, and you describe why that happens. Then you're going to tell them what is to come next. That's that continuation chain in. Tell them what's made to share the ugly and the pain points, along with the successes and the joys of the journey through the process. All of it's important. All of it's part of the learning process. it's very important to share that out where it's really okay. So things to avoid, and we'll be sharing the PowerPoint now so you can read these in greater detail. Biases, we're all familiar that we all have biases. We just want to be as cognizant of that as possible. Just remember the DEI is not just a metric or a KPI. You need to be able to symbolize your data outside and be very DEI conscious. And that's why I say it's not just a metric KPI. How you share your information fits under DEI. You don't want to go through and use these little blue and pink people to symbolize sex and gender, because we know that gender is just a whole swath. And last time I checked, I've seen over 79 variations. So just by labeling it male, female, blue, pink, doesn't quite work anymore. Also be aware, did you unintentionally place untapped groups into a negative space on a graph? Did you take a community and put them, think of that quadrant, your 4 quadrants, and you've got the negative. Did you put an untapped community in there? And most people learned in school that, you got your negative X, you got your negative Y, that's the negative area. And then people will start to think of that as a negative population. So keep that in mind in how you present. Also make sure all your outputs are ADA compliant. And if they're not, you want to go through and make sure you can make them as ADA compliant as possible. One thing that drives me crazy is saying, let the numbers speak for themselves. The numbers don't speak for themselves. You need to tell that story. You're representing these individuals, these communities, these shared spaces. It is our job to speak for the numbers and to tell the truth and to tell what that means. So I will leave it there and stop sharing. And we have not much time left, but I could probably take like a question or two.
Thank you so much, Ansel, for that wonderful presentation. And yes, if anyone has questions, you're welcome to drop them into the chat. We also have an announcement in the chat from Brian, our IT specialist, with a link to the feedback survey. We'll send that out by email as well with a recording, but we would love it if you could give us feedback on today's event.
Definitely. And if anybody has questions to come up with outside of today, just feel free to email me and I'll be happy to respond back. I would like to thank everybody for attending today. Yes, I see somebody's asking about the slides. I will be sharing those with Kelsey and Brian, and then they can share those out to the group.